evening and welcome to the May 17th City of Eugene Budget Committee. I'm John Borofsky. I'm the chairperson. Welcome to everybody in attendance in the gallery and watching at home. We have a couple of things to get to today, and then we have a public hearing at 7:30. So if there's anybody watching that would like to address the Budget Committee, show up at City Hall at 7:30 and sign a little piece of paper, and we'd be happy to listen to your input. We have received several correspondence electronically through the city, and they have been duly noted, at least by myself, and I'm sure by the majority of the committee. I can't speak for everybody, but I went through and read my correspondence. We have a few things on the agenda for this evening. First off, I'd like to make a clarification. At the end of last meeting, I noted that we would go through and talk more about intended motions today and then start putting motions on the table. It was brought to my attention that it would be best for us to listen to the public hearing before we actually start taking final motions on the budget. So, time permitting, after the public hearing at 7:30, that's when we'll start putting motions on the table. This meeting here, there's a few intended motions that we haven't had a chance to discuss, and some other business that we'll be talking about. But with that, I think we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. First thing on the agenda is the minutes approval. Minutes were sent out in a packet from the May 3rd meeting. Does anybody have any changes or corrections that they would like to make to those minutes? I'm not seeing any. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of May 3rd.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please raise their hands. Opposed? Abstaining. Okay, the motion carries. Another announcement that I would like to make, I was informed by staff earlier today that we are scheduling one more budget committee meeting. This would be for May 27th. Tentative time is 5:30. Place has yet to be determined. The meeting, or the purpose of the meeting, will be to discuss the Urban Renewal Agency, and this is contingent on whether, if the council passes their motion on, what date is that the council is set to act?
24th.
On the 24th, the council is set to act to make some changes to the Urban Renewal Agency. If that passes, there is some funding things that initially they thought would be brought forward at a supplemental budget. It's been brought forward to me that staff would like to include them in this budget for the 2011 one that we will be adopting. So there may be some changes to what we adopt on Wednesday night. So there will be time to discuss that and make more recommendations to the City Council for their final approval in June. So with that, we will open the meeting up for discussion. Is there anybody that wants to say anything before we get started on talking about some of the new intended motions that have been brought forward? Betty?
Can we vote on whether we want that extra meeting or not?
I don't know. I don't know but as far as I'm concerned, there is going to be changes to the general funding and to the budget as a whole. And I brought up at an earlier meeting that I think it would be advantageous not only to council but staff as well as to what the citizen members' input on some of those funding strategies may be, or funding changes may be. So. And if we want to get it in, we have to have a meeting or do a supplement. There, you had to have it?
Yeah, but before I get to my question, I'm just wondering if we'd want to just do a quick poll of see how many members of the Budget Committee would be available for that meeting. If we just want to not worry about it because it may or may not happen. Because I won't be here.
We can do that if it's the will of the body.
What night was that again?
What night is it?
27th.
Thursday night?
Thursday, May 27th.
Yeah, I might have a problem with that date, although I could change it. I was scheduled for some minor surgery on that date, so I can change it maybe. If that's a Wednesday?
Thursday.
Yeah, it still might be a problem because I'd be
About a
recovering.
holiday weekend almost.
So that would be a problem. But I might be able to change it. I can have a call tomorrow.
We know we
I'd
have.
love to put it off.
Is there anybody else who knows they won't be available? I mean,
I'm out of town.
Okay.
but the majority of folks look like they'll be.
I don't know, I have to check.
Okay.
So the reason I raised my hand initially was because in my May 10th, I believe, email with my list of questions about specific general fund questions, I also put a question out there to see if we could get an update on the Country Club Road and just to check in with council, because I don't know if you guys put a deadline on that, or that's, I believe, $16 million in monies that have been dedicated to that deal that hasn't gone anywhere so far. Who would like to speak to that?
Well, I don't want to say anything. John can give you the information, but I think we were very exuberant around that, and I just wonder if that isn't part of the problem. We were excited.
Well, at this point,
Anyway, John.
city manager, if you could maybe just talk a little bit about the supplemental meeting, just to, if you want to expand on what I've said, and then answer Claire's question.
You bet. The purpose of the supplemental meeting is to give the Budget Committee an opportunity to consider the portion of the downtown public safety package before it actually gets put into the budget. You might remember what's in the budget right now does not include the entire package because the concept is as the financing on the various pieces is secured, we would bring that back as a supplemental part of the package. On the 24th, the council, on the 24th, the council will be considering the ordinance on the downtown urban renewal amendment, which includes part of funding for the downtown public safety proposal. And so the time that the Budget Committee could comment on that would be on that Thursday, on the 26th, would then allow any comments that this committee might have to provide back to the council before final adoption of the budget, and then that piece would actually be incorporated into the FY11 budget as opposed to coming back at a different supplemental time. So that was the purpose of doing that, if the Budget Committee has a desire to do that.
Country Club Road?
With respect to Country Club Road, we are continuing negotiations with the seller. As you might imagine, there's several pieces to that negotiation that make it more challenging than just a typical property transaction. There are current tenants in the facility. There's also different financing that the owner currently has. And so part of that is working through all of those issues. And so it's we're hopeful that we can come to a resolution shortly on that. That's what our hope will be.
And in the direction that council gave on that, was there any kind of timeline? Was there a time they said if you don't have a deal by X, come back to us for reconsideration?
There wasn't, and I wouldn't encourage that, just from negotiating the property transactions and understanding the complexity of this particular deal. So,
Well, I appreciate that. I just want us all to remember that those funds are there, tied up in that right now, and I supported that motion. I mean, we didn't get to vote on that as Budget Committee, but I was in support of seeking that properties, but I still want us to be mindful of the fact we're in a tight situation, and those are funds that right now are unavailable for anything else.
All right. Okay, with that, since our last meeting, we did cover the intended motions that were put on the table that we had before our last meeting. Since then, there have been a couple that have come in that are similar and related. Shanda and Claire both have motions regarding LCAS, and Claire has another one regarding the Human Services Commission. So I think what we'll do is we'll put the motion, Claire's first motion on there, and then we'll let Shanda talk to hers as well, and we'll just get the discussion going on
Should be
that.
after John. But we'll do that later.
Councilor Clark just had a point of order that he had expected, I guess, his motion to be on the
After
list.
yours on there. From our last meeting.
Question.
Okay, well, and this is not this isn't the order that we'll be acting on them, but did you feel yours was discussed enough at last meeting, or would you like to talk about it more? Okay.
This time.
All right.
Thank you.
Question?
Yes.
I withdrew my motion on restoring the 14,000, so it shouldn't be there.
Okay. So Claire, I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay, so I forwarded this intended motion around restoring the $200,000 cut to LCAS, and I did not identify a specific place to take money from another program. I put it out there partly to engender some discussion, which has already happened with Shanda's motion, around where maybe to look for some funding. So I put it as coming out of the contingency with the idea that it would be one-time funding to bridge us through FY11. I acknowledge that our budget needs to stabilize and that many departments are taking cuts or making do without needed increases of funds, but it does seem the proposed cut to LCAS really does represent a greater percentage of their budget than of cuts being made in other city departments. And it seems that without more involvement on the part of the city, these cuts are going to result in service cuts for the city of Eugene, which will impact our community. So, I think the lack of budget detail made it kind of difficult for me to find some places to seek changes. I asked those questions around the funding where I saw ads that had been made, and just using the example of the fire and EMS, in our budget presentation, it was shown to us that we would see a general fund reduction of $226,000, but the details showed actually an increase of general fund money going to the fire and EMS to help us with the transition into the new combined service. So I felt like if I started pulling out pieces from there, I'm now interfering with a plan that's been detailed out with with other agencies, and I'd run the risk of screwing that up possibly by saying, no, I'm going to take $100,000 from that to fund LCAS. So I would like my super round.
Yes.
So that's why I chose the strategy of identifying the one-time dollars for contingency, but I'm definitely open to ideas of maybe pulling small amounts from other places that have been allocated. I am concerned also that the city manager and the city council don't seem to have a clear idea on what they want from the county and LCAS. I hear we want alternative models and greater efficiencies, but I haven't heard anything more than that. So since we appear to have a contract relationship with LCAS, it seems to me we should be able to better articulate what we want out of the contract, and if it's not working for the city, then to come up with our alternative model, or else be better able to articulate what's not working about it. I don't think making this kind of unilateral cut is going to achieve better services for our city. So that lack of a clear statement about what the problem is makes me wonder if the real issue is something else, like the relationship between the city and county maybe, so maybe a political issue, or that LCAS is a fairly easy target because it's not a city department. And so we would prioritize our city departments, but it's still providing a city service that we've heard is essential from folks here at this table and from the folks who've come and either offered in-person comment or via email. So the bottom line, I think, is the city needs to have the capacity to fund the needed animal services, and that we've received input that this is important, and I'd like us to find a way to restore this $200,000 for FY11.
Okay. Shanda, do you want to have us do a round of discussion, or since yours is so closely tied, would you like to talk to yours right now, or?
It's up to what folks want to do. I'm open.
Well, I'm going to, then if that's the case, what I'll do is we'll do a round talking to Claire's motion, and then I'll put yours out, and we can talk to yours, okay?
Okay.
And I've got Betty in the queue.
Thank you. I was hoping we'd talk about Shanda's first, but that's...
Okay.
Well, and that's fine. I mean, if that's
It's okay either way.
Yeah, okay.
We're not doing anything but talking anyway.
Right.
I think probably we're going to need to restore this, even though I have a lot of problems with the way LCAS functions. My observation and the observations of people I know. But I think I would prefer to take $100,000 from Economic Development Fund, for example. But I think that if we restore this, we should immediately start talking about what we want. If we're contributing a lot of money to LCAS, we as a council should start talking about what services we want. And we've never done that in 13 and a half years I've been on the council. And I think we maybe need to meet with them, but we need to talk about what are they doing for the city, and what do we wish they would do, and what do we wish they wouldn't do, maybe. And I don't know what proportion of their budget is this $200,000, John?
About 10%.
That's quite a lot, actually. And I think we have a right to talk about what we want for that money and to negotiate about it. And that's, as for the funding, I could see several places where we might get it. As I said, economic development, that's a rather vague thing, and I'm not sure what that's doing. And someone could argue probably that taking care of the animals' safety is an economic issue. Thank you.
Mary Ann?
Yes, about what we want, well, what we're getting in the end of '09 was 90% of dogs returned to owners or adopted, and only .07 euthanized. That's a pretty good record. On cats, we're a little less, but 75% are, it should in the first one, either returned to owners or adopted. The second one with cats is 75% returned to owners, and 35% adopted. Returned to owners, and only 7% euthanized. There's more cats than it's ours. And 80% of the dogs, it has been said, I don't think we have exact numbers, are in Eugene. And the county is responsible for all of the operations of LCAS, even the collection of the fees, the professional expertise. They have spent two different reports and months, the Animal Advisory Committee, looking at all of these alternatives, which were only brought up by the Budget Committee citizen members and people who attended. And so I think we are getting I do read a lot of animal literature. I'm not one of those passionate, dog or cat people, but we are foster parenting, puppy parenting, using foster care. We're doing a lot of the things that are being done in modern kennels. If you saw Nova about animals last night, it was about the mental health values of pets. I consider them part of our Eugene demographic populations, and they do more than just keep them off the streets. We offer them as companions. There's probably a lot of people in this room that have an animal companion. So I think that there's a lot we are getting, and taking the $200,000 according to Gaffney thing is going to really decimate the agency.
Thank you. Mike Clark.
Thanks, sir. I know that the county has a loss of a couple of $1 million this year, but without reauthorization of rural schools, they're looking at a cut of $14 to $17 million the year next year, and another of a similar size the year after that, which will cut their general fund in half or better. So my question is, if this is a county program, what's the health of it long-term? What's the county's disposition of their budget? I mean, if we're going to continue to participate with them as partners, are they in fact going to continue to operate this? What do we know about the long-term health of the agency?
I don't think we have any information beyond sort of what our current contract is, so we don't know what their long-term plans are for animal services.
Has there been any discussion at the county budget level so far, because they've begun their meetings as well, and I'm sorry, but I have not followed them in the last couple meetings, as to their inclination for funding LCAS at the county level? Anybody can fill us in?
Councilor Clark, the only thing that I could say to speak to that is that I have not heard of any specific reductions to the LCAS service. They are looking at the potential of funding a new facility, which would lead me to believe they're interested in a long-term investment in the program. But that's all the information that I have.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Well,
Anybody else? No. Joe, I'm sorry.
Doug. Doug.
He hasn't got gills on his neck.
Don't necessarily disagree with Claire. Again, more just comments, guys. I believe they made 4,700 enforcement contacts in 2009, but only issued 526 citations. So it appears just as unclear as the city may have about what's expected of them, they seem to have delivered on those unclear expectations. So anything around that, I think if we made a one-time adjustment or a one-time gap, really needs to focus on somehow, and this is an enforcement issue, they really should start looking towards greater enforcement of fines. The second observation is if you take a look at the fees that the city has versus to the county, and just do kind of an anecdotal average, the county has fines that are 80% higher than the city, and I have no idea what's the background on that. But I just think anything, especially if we decided to be fair to staff, if we're going to use one-time funds to bridge the gap, there has to be something to be said about our expectations in terms of enforcement, because I believe that's the number one requirement, actually, to read the contract, is actually enforcing the Eugene Code, and then second, having some type of idea of what do we do about the fine.
No one else?
Anybody else for round one? Mary Ann.
Well, regarding the county's activities, I do somewhat follow the county. And as far as I know, but I could be wrong, they haven't brought that up specifically in the budget meeting, and that may be a problem because this reduction hasn't been discussed by the city and the county. I don't know who should initiate it, but since we did the reduction, we the city, and it's supposed to be an intergovernmental agreement, and there's a lot of contract language there that says who should do what, and it appears to me that the county did what it was supposed to do in the last time around. And so I think that it's absolutely necessary for us as the county officially and the mayor or whoever is put to the task to talk with the county and see if something cannot be worked out. This is supposed to be a partnership, which is a favorite word these days, and it doesn't look like it is. And I may be biased, having been on county budget for 9 years, but it appears that this has come as a surprise. Karen Gaffney came here and told us what would happen, but then I mentioned somewhere in the discussions that we should get together, somebody appointed by our finance committee or the mayor or one of the councilors, somebody that would take the authority to have that discussion. So that's what I think has to happen so that it's a fair assessment. Under this agreement, this county could probably just say, well, we won't provide animal services anymore. Some county people said that to me, and the city wants to run their own, animal services. They could do that, but they're proposing using an alternate service when we already have one. It ain't broke, why fix it? So I think the only way to fix this is to have the county and city work together.
I put myself down. Just for a point of clarification, when does this contract run? Is it fiscal year to fiscal year, so you renegotiate it?
Correct. We have been in negotiations for... Since April.
Okay. And I guess this comes down to me, if in my business I have a contract, let's say I have a contract with my healthcare provider, and that's kind of how I'm looking at it. And I look at this year and say, you know what, they want $1,000 a month for my health care. And I'm looking at my budget and I say, you know what, I can't afford $1,000 a month this year. I go back to that provider and I say, what can I get for $800 a month? And they give me the offers. And so I kind of think that's what the city manager is trying to put forth. It's not that we don't want to have the best possible animal control thing in our city that we can get, but we've got to get what we can afford, is the way that I see it. Now, when we put forward that we can only afford 10% less, the provider came back and said, well, then you're going to get these draconian cuts. And I think that I'm hoping that in these negotiations we can get it so it's not as draconian. But we won't know that because we won't see the contract before we adopt this budget. So it's a quandary. I don't want to see 2 enforcement officers go away. I think to me that's not an acceptable trade-off. I would have higher deductible on my health insurance rather than do that. But where we're going, it's still very wishy-washy to me. So I'm not sure how I'm going to come down on it. Anybody else care to speak? Well, at this point, I think it would be a good idea. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to clarify a couple things, Claire, that you had mentioned in your first part about the overall budget. And the total budget, you might remember, increased by 1 plus some change %, the total budget. If you look at the general fund,
Changes thousands.
if you look at the general fund 6-year forecast, the FY10 to FY11 budget actually decreases by $2 million total. And that includes all of our union contracts. And so when you look at the fire department, the vast majority of that is our union contract. You might remember they agreed to take a 0% COLA in FY10, and which essentially froze that portion of the base. And so FY11 is now paying for the contract that we've negotiated with them, which is where you see most of that increase in that. And so that's where the totals come in.
I appreciate that.
Okay. So at this point, Shanda, would you like to put forward your motion and give us some explanation behind what your rationales are?
Sure. So, like Claire and some of the others that have spoken, I felt that maybe LCAS could be cut less than what's being proposed. Again, another thing I'm hearing is that there's a lot of unknowns with this. So I'm coming from that. I'm coming from being a new budget committee member, but I just, anyway, took a crack at this issue. It looks like LCAS does provide good service. Again, I don't know what the city's looking for in terms of more efficient or different or better service, but and I looked at restoring the cuts on a lesser degree than the full 200,000 to make it a little bit more consistent with other reductions to city services in terms of total percentage reduction. I know that varies depending on the programs, but and then also in terms of I wanted to challenge myself to come up with an offset that, again, wasn't pulling from the contingency fund or from reserves. And again, this was somewhat choosing blindly because I don't know a whole lot about the detail of the budget. I'm just learning all of the services that the city provides. But I did notice that the second cahoots van was an additional service. Again, this was difficult for me to propose because I believe that cahoots is a great service. And again, there's a little bit of unknowns. I don't know the history or what the need was or recommendations that came down to add the second cahoots van. And I definitely want my second round.
Okay.
So there's that. But I thought there could be a compromise with an added service. And I don't know if this is even feasible, but to delay the contract of the second van until 6 months into the fiscal year could free up the $125,000. And that the restoring the $125,000 I thought could be more of a stopgap than an ongoing continuation of the services if it sounds like the city wants to work with the county to either, sounds like there could be opportunities for increasing revenues or looking at providing services more efficiently or effectively with less dollars. So this would be just for fiscal year 11 to getting us through that process. So that was all of my thoughts around this motion. So.
Okay. Andrea?
Well, good work. It's good to see that you're thinking about not taking from the contingency fund or from the general fund. But
Shame on me.
No. I mean, I'm going to throw out some stuff later on that people are going to probably say the same thing about me. But so I'm challenged to support this because I think the whole downtown initiative is like it's like a comprehensive package. And I feel like if we delay one part of it, then then the other parts will have to compensate. And really, Cahoots is a good bang for its buck when you think about what kind of services we get from the folks that work on Cahoots. And so that would be a place that I would recommend taking money from. And Mike, you made a couple comments about the county's budget, and that makes me do wonder where, next year. I mean, if we do end up giving them $200,000 this year, and by the way, I know that we're county residents too. That's why I voted for Rob Handy. But if they're not going to continue having this, I'm wondering if we're just throwing money at the sinking ship, and if it's not something that they're going to sustain in their budget, then I'm really curious as to whether we should be looking for ways to fund this. So, I guess that's it.
Claire?
So, yeah, I appreciate you thinking creatively and challenging yourself more than I was willing to challenge myself. And I also appreciate the city manager's answer about the ads to the fire and EMS, because that just speaks exactly to my dilemma that, well, if I had said, well, there's a big hunk of money, I'm going to take some of that. It's spoken for a valid and important purpose. So I think that's part of what we're wrangling with here, and I have heard from some of the city councilors there are some ads, one-time money that they think might be better used to bridge this gap if they have the faith that the county's going to hold up their end of the service. So I was curious, though, John, your just initial response, setting aside the political imperative that the Downtown Public Safety Initiative is a package, just in practical terms of what might be the impact of delaying a contract in the way that Shonda's proposed here.
The way it would work with a second Cahoots vehicle is if the funding is approved, then of course we have to sort of negotiate and go through a purchase process. Realistically, would there be some delay in that? Probably so. On July 1st, the program would not start up, and so there would be some delay in that. So are there some one-time dollars? Yes. Is it 6 months? I don't know if it's 6 months. Is it 3 months? Is it 4 months? So there's probably a piece in there. And I've expressed this before, my concern will be is that the one-time turns into an ongoing again. And so that's still a concern. But to answer your question, there is some probably freeboard in there from when we're actually spend that first dollar on the second Cahoots vehicle won't be July 1st. So there's some period of time in there.
Okay. And I had also looked at the fee schedule for general fees and fines and did see some places where there were pretty big discrepancies between what the city charged someone and what the county did. And, just a couple of things I identified that I thought, I don't know that, obviously, these aren't going to reap huge amounts of money because there's enforcement issues and then other concerns when you raise fees. Sometimes people choose to do business in other places. So the commercial kennel fee and the commercial breeder fee were two fees I saw that were wildly disparate between, I could look them up, and also the late fee for renewing your license in the city is just $10, which is pretty minor. I don't think it should be huge, but that seems to me a pretty minor little fine for that. That's, a number of late books at the library would come up to.
Chris?
Thanks. One of the most exciting things for me about the budget discussion is our willingness to try to be creative and try ideas, and I think that's a good thing. And it really boils us back down to the basic discussion that we're at a point in our budget where we're having to choose between two good things, which is never easy. And so that's what's making this particularly hard. Yeah, I think LCAS is a good investment at whatever level. We should try to do that. Do I want to give up Cahoots, the other good thing? No, I don't, because I see that also having a whole ripple-through effect. Where else would I go to get it? I appreciate your dilemma because I can't obviously think of a place to get it, which then talks about the fact that the budget we were presented with was a series of connected dots that were thought about very long and hard before it even got to us. So I think we can tweak, which is what we've been doing, but when we start to get to the torquing level, trying to torque this budget, which I think $200,000 is kind of in the torque category, it's hard to do that without starting to bump other things, which then start falling over. So for me, this whole discussion is very troublesome because trying to find $200,000 out of this budget means something else that's good in some way is going to have to suffer. And I agree. A contingency is therefore a contingent, and if you look at our history, there have been a number of contingencies that we've had to deal with, or reserves, or other kinds of things. It's a challenge, and so I'm not automatically in favor of moving money around, and I think Andrea also raised, and Claire raised some very good questions about where does that money go? What does it do? What do we get for it? And more conversation needs to be had. So really, I'm taking the long way around to say, this is a really nice proposal, but I'm not yet motivated to make this level of torquing adjustment in the budget knowing there's going to be these ripple effects that are going to really move through it. It's hard to do.
Mike Clark?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm probably less inclined to support the idea of taking the expansion of Cahoots away. I had a very good friend for a very long time years ago who was one of the guys who worked in the Cahoots bands, and I used to hear all the stories of the things that they dealt with on a personal, on-the-street basis, and the work that they do is critical, and it does goes a great long way to alleviating the work of the police department, and I think that anything we can do to make them more successful is really critically important right now. Andrea touched on the reason I brought up the questions and the information about the county budget is actually, for me, a larger conversation than just this little piece about LCAS. Certainly, we don't want to get into the business of taking over county functions, and certainly we shouldn't. The jail, for example, is something that they have a duty and a legal obligation to operate from the state of Oregon, and so that's their job to do, and we shouldn't be looking to take over that function. But I have serious doubts about that organization's ability to continue in the direction they're going, to be responsible, to take care of some of these things, and that the citizens look to us to be able to maintain both the partnerships like this and some of the services that maybe there's less differentiation on whether that's the city or the county. And so I think we should be preparing for those sorts of eventualities. If they're unable to maintain their end of that partnership, what we will be willing to do about it, or what our contingency plans will be. So I'm not certain that I'm interested in taking away either of the other proposed pieces, but I'm very much interested in seeing us continue with animal control in a meaningful and effective way. Like I said last week, it's, in my opinion, a valuable public safety function we need to take care of. So,
Terry.
Third round?
I appreciate the discussion about cahoots and all the kind comments about the good, very valid comments. I also appreciate Councilor Ortiz's comments about the comprehensive strategy downtown and for the desire to increase the policing and to do more enforcement with cahoots and so forth. I would like to remind everyone, however, that the third portion of the recommendation as it's coming forward is completely unfunded at all. And that is to create the wet housing that was put in the police department's recommendations as to how to deal with this issue. And until such time as that piece goes into place, the downtown strategy, I think, will continue to have a hole in it. So anything that you're going to diminish is going to be taking away even more. And if there's going to be ads, it needs to go into that last section.
Joe?
Make two clarification questions. So we do or do not know that LCAS at the county level are slated for any type of budget reductions for their site. It appears not.
I'm not aware of any.
Okay. And then remind me, maybe a question for staff again. So we're making up a $6.5 million shortfall for the general fund.
About 5.7 this year.
What's that relative? What's relative to what percentage of that, John, is relative to the general fund budget?
On the general fund budget, it's 120 million plus or minus.
All right, so
5%.
5%. So
that's on top of what was last year.
Maybe to follow my cohort here, maybe in the spirit of creativity, as a citizen of Eugene and feeling that 5% cut, theoretically, I don't think we should ever ask the citizens of Eugene to take a budget cut larger than this contract. I mean, meaning that to me it would be a shame to have LCAS impact no reduction whatsoever, but our budget experience is a 5% reduction. This doesn't make sense to me. So, maybe in the spirit of some type of compromise, we find that one-time fund and the county has to come back with a plan, whether it be enforcements or fees. But to me, I'd have a hard time supporting just the full $200,000 commitment to that, knowing that our budget's taking a 5% cut.
George Pauly.
Well, in the discussion, first of all, Shanda, thank you for the creative thinking. I think this is a lot better proposal. What we need to remember, though, is we're not going to be losing any of Cahoot's services. It's just we're delaying the addition of more of the services. So I don't look at it as a real major loss. But the problem is, again, this is a one-time funding for ongoing services, and we have to quit doing that. Just absolutely have to stop doing that.
Mary Ann?
Yeah, my third round, I want to take issue with that they have, LCAS has not been effective or efficient, because I gave you the data. They're about as efficient as an animal control operation can be. You sent us that data. So I don't agree the fact that they're not well run and they're not efficient. We have a lot of people testifying to that. I haven't seen any data on how bad they are. I've only heard comments. And yes, some people have had bad experiences, but I think that generally, given the very lean budget that they have, and if we compared it to Boulder, Colorado, as we saw Nova, they did them as a private thing. If we have to, in the city has decided that we should re-evaluate the services, the county feels that the services have done well. They've been reformed. There have been 2 reports over 2 years, and I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is, do we want to keep LCAS funded, and if we want a new fund, I think that's the county's decision to do. It doesn't appear to me that that's been discussed. It's in a way the city has kind of usurped the county's function about whether they run the animal control system. Animal control generally, as a precedent, is done as a part of health and safety, and/or I don't know what counties have it as a police function. That's where we put it. It's put in human services over at the county. But I think that it's an obligation of the county to provide the services, and that they are now providing them, and that they have proved it to you. They have given you reports. So what more can they do other than return pets to owners? Yes, licensing all across the board, and if you study other ones, collecting it will be difficult. It always is, and you're going to reduce court funding, so that would not help. So I don't think it's true that they haven't been efficient, particularly on the lean budget that they already have. So wanting to start something new, it isn't broken.
Thank you. Anybody else for the first round? Claire?
So, just to speak to a couple of things I heard, I mean, the reason, cheating a little bit to go back to my motion. Well, I mean, I appreciate the thinking that Councilor Pauling just shared, that it wouldn't be a loss of services in terms of cahoots, but it would be delaying implementation of a strategic plan for downtown. And I also appreciate what Terry McDonald mentioned about parts of that plan that haven't even yet been funded, that could be critical to its success. But this idea of one-time funding to address ongoing issues, if you do believe that it's an ongoing concern, then we shouldn't necessarily be cutting the funding to this extent, because we'll lose those services most likely, and then I guess we could live for that budget year and see what it's like to not have the enforcement officer, to not have the cattery. I think losing the cattery will be a less obvious impact for a lot of people in the community, but will still be an impact. So I just wanted to challenge you to think about that. And then I didn't mention this in my proposal, I probably should have, that the reserves proposed for FY11 are over $12 million. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Which is almost double what they were for FY10. So I'm not suggesting that, well, woo, all this money, let's go get it. But when we're considering this loss of service, I think it does justify dipping into reserves. And the reason I proposed one-time funding was because of the concerns raised by the city manager and the city council around how the service is being delivered, and the fact that you all seem to want to engage the county in some kind of process to change the service. So that was part of why I looked at the one time.
Can I, just to respond to the reserve, I'm not sure what other page everybody's looking at. If you look at page F25, which is the 6-year financial forecast, take a look at the reserve for revenue shortfall. That's at $10.4 million, which would be that sort of that savings account. Remember, what we're doing is we're accumulating cash in FY11 in order to meet our obligations FY12, which is both the PERS and the library levy absorption. So that's going to draw it down, and then we're going to try to accumulate a little bit more cash in order to meet the same kind of a deal in FY14, and then sort of try to balance from there and eventually move towards 8%, and as we get out to FY16, that's at 6.7%. So that's why you see the buildup of cash in FY11 to try to move us through this PERS and the library levy, as well as meet the general ongoing obligations of the fund.
So maybe then, if it's the will of this group to try and restore that funding, maybe some of it will come from different places within the budget.
Yep. Anybody else care to speak to this? Okay. Claire has another motion.
Yes. So I serve as the chair of the Human Services Commission, and last year this body saw fit to help provide some stabilization funds to the Human Services Commission, which is a commission that's funded by the county, the city of Eugene, and the city of Springfield to coordinate social services in our area. So it funds many social service agencies that provide services to folks who live in the city. So this funding would be the continuation of some one-time funding, and my hope is that it wouldn't need to be brought back again. And that is the $150,000 stabilization. And this is really general fund money that would allow the social service providers to keep falling further behind in terms of staff support. So right now, the majority of money that is passed to the HSC, whether it's through the city, the state, or the federal government, is very limited, and only about 5% is ever allowed to be used for administration, which would mean the staff that's actually administering the services. The rest of the money is meant for direct services to clients. So this $150,000 of general fund money would be vital in helping social service providers to continue to meet the needs of their clients while not reducing staff hours or staff salaries or making cuts. And you can trust that folks who are working in these organizations are not there to make lots of money. So I propose this particular method of funding, which is kind of piggybacking on what John Borowski had proposed around using the marginal beginning working capital, the $900,000 transfer, and then John's proposal for $200,000. Mine would come after that. And right now, and I chose this method because we are making tough choices, and this is one-time additional funding on top of the generous funding that the city makes. It would be a small but important infusion of funds to make sure they can keep their staff and that the staff themselves don't have to access social services.
All right.
Thank you for letting me run over.
Andrea?
I'm going to probably use by super round. So I'm suggesting, and I sent out an email to the group last night and to staff. I'm assuming you guys get my email. And then I'd asked if staff could speak to this, to my email. So I suggest that we take $100,000 out of line item. Let's see, where is it? On page A9. Where is it? Help me out. I'm sorry, what page? A9.
Pavel, can you pause it for
A10?
if you look on the other
Oh, I'm
page.
sorry, I apologize, it was A10. One-time items of diversity, equity, strategic planning, climate change action plan implementation. And the reason I suggested that we take some money out of that was because I'm a little challenged by the work that's being done around the diversity and equity strategic plan, and I'm really curious. And John, I've talked to you about this, and I've talked to staff about it, and I still feel like I've not gotten as clear an answer as I think I would have gotten. And I understand that another RFP went out recently to look for data, and I just am curious. So I guess that really has no bearing on this conversation, but what I did ask staff to speak to was whether these monies meant jobs. And I see somebody shaking their head no.
I guess when I let Kelly talk to some of these too, but when we're talking about the Climate and Energy Action Plan and the DESP, or Diversity and Equity Strategic Plan, neither one of those will actually go out, and we're not going to create new jobs in the community in and of themselves. I
meant internally.
What they will do is continue the work. And being able to actually move forward on the Climate and Energy Action Plan, for example, continue the work on the recommendations that the council has put forward and already approved to move forward on that, move forward on some of our food security issues, on our energy plan. So it's to keep the work moving forward.
And so do we need additional staff to do that?
I don't know, Kelly, if you have some...
We haven't identified additional staff associated with this item. Last week, City Council had a work session in which there was discussion of a draft plan for community climate and energy action. So there are a number of implementation pieces associated with that would continue, as well as with the diversity and equity strategic plan. And some of the action steps that would happen as part of this one-time funding would bring those two together. So as for instance, both of those plans recognize the need to look at emergency response plans and how they accommodate and address the safety of vulnerable populations. So there'd be an evaluation of emergency management plans.
Also, there'd be some investment in resources for language access and interpretation resources. So there are those sorts of things as well.
Okay.
And I'm also wondering about an RFP for data. I'm not sure what that refers to.
I just, so around, not necessarily speaking to the climate change and action plan, but around the diversity and equity strategic plan, I checked in with communities, not the broad base, but I checked in with handfuls of people around this, and that was what they spoke to, was that there had been an RFP put out by the city looking for more data, and I wasn't sure what that was about, and I was hoping I could get an answer to that. So at some point. So I feel like this is very valuable to continue supporting HSC and the work that all the nonprofits do. And I would much rather see those dollars spent in that regard. I think I would have to challenge you, Claire. I do think that a lot of the people that work for social service agencies qualify for those services that the agencies actually provide. I know I'm working on a plan around healthcare, and that is, it's just amazing what people will do out of the passion to help other people. And so I would much rather direct some funds that way. And then I just took I didn't really want to just look at that particular one-time item. That is why I put in the other issue around the economy part. Yeah, it's the same one. I just looked, and I don't really have I don't really know what's coming out of that, but I just thought, to help kind of lessen the load on one particular group of folks. So that was it.
Okay. Mike Clark?
Thanks, sir. Actually, I was hoping that my motion would come in directly after John Borowski's on the mechanism, but we'll get to that later, I suppose. That's why I said it last time. But, yeah, it didn't make it on the paper, but that's what we'll be discussing in the next meeting, I'm certain. This is, you mentioned one-time funding that's a repeat of last year's one-time funding. And we did it the year before, as I recall, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
So it's the third year of one-time funding? It is, in fact, very valuable. I mean, you've both spoken very passionately to that, and what I read in the Register Guard helps me understand the importance of it, too. My understanding is we're likely to see some manner of ballot measure for the fall that may deal with this? Do I have that right?
Probably not this fall.
Probably not this fall?
No.
Not this fall, probably not this fall. May at the soonest.
Okay, thank you very much.
George?
Just for clarification purposes, we're talking about this transfer of $900,000. Is that a guaranteed?
No.
So there's no guarantee that there's going to be anything above that even then? So
That's correct.
So we could pass these motions and then have them go unfunded?
That's correct.
Well, that answered that question. And then the other thing is, how much, over the past, say, 2 fiscal years, not counting this year, how much has the Human Services Commission, how much have we increased our contribution to that?
Scott has the specifics.
Helps you.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, there's actually one particular page in the document that shows how we've done, and I can't right off the top of my head. But if you remember when John went over his opening remarks, there's that one flat $1,035,000 that we've maintained. So then the variable has been, for instance, this 150. So as a stabilization, we've pretty well kept them whole. So.
Okay, so we haven't reduced our contribution to the Human Services Commission over the past number of years.
No.
Okay. And then I found it kind of interesting that Claire's opening comment was this is a continuation of one-time funding, which means it's no longer one-time funding, it's ongoing services. So let's call it what it is and figure out how to cut something else from the budget and just go ahead and add that to the $1 million plus that we're already giving to the Human Services Commission and quit, fooling people.
Jennifer.
Okay.
You're done.
Well, that
Right.
was going to be my question. What did you say in your opening comments? I heard you say that we wouldn't be doing this again,
I said I hope that we wouldn't be doing it again.
meaning that you want it to become an automatic add of 150 every year? Because we've been doing this one time for several years in a row now. So why do you think this year's going to be the last year?
I don't. When we added it last year, it was in anticipation of the recession that we were in. I'm thinking that we're still going to be struggling with that through FY11. I'm hoping that in FY12 that we'll maybe have a human services levy that's passed of some sort, and we won't need to feel like this is something else to add on to our budget.
Okay. Well, I'm on the Human Services Commission, and so, and just my personal work in the community with the folks that do work for these agencies, I don't have an issue with what you're asking. I do really, though, support more Andrea's suggestion to take it out of this diversity and climate proposal. I don't recall at the work session that all of those programs that they were mentioned cost $200,000. Was that mentioned at the work session that we just had last week?
No.
And I think Kelly mentioned emergency preparedness response for vulnerable populations. Well, that should be in our emergency preparedness plan that we've had, I think, Joe Rizzi come and talk to the council about. And frankly, in an emergency, everybody's vulnerable. So I just think there are some things in that program that aren't critical and aren't as necessary and don't give us as much value as the folks who work in the human services agencies do.
Okay. I put myself down. I have a couple of questions. One, I guess, to Claire, since she's the chair. With your funding strategy, probably the earliest that this funding, if it were available, would be until the first of the year. Would that be logistically working for these type of contractors if they didn't know they could get it until after January 1?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay, I think that would be something that we would want to look at. These other uses for the marginal beginning working capital aren't time sensitive. They're not contract sensitive. So that would be something that you may want to look at. And then I guess getting back to Andrea's, what I hope will be an amendment from Andrea once Claire's motion hits the table. I think she was asking if the money that is allocated for these programs, the staff that is being allocated to those, if that funding went away, would that department make staff cuts because that money is part of their budget? And I guess that, so you wouldn't cut staff. You didn't build your budget around, your personnel budget around using that $100,000. I think that's what you were trying to ask. So if the money went from whatever initiatives that Councilor Ortiz plans on amending it from, wouldn't mean that somebody's going to get laid off on the city side because their budget was impacted negatively. So that's all.
Probably one clarification around that. We do have Matt McRae who's working on the Energy and Climate Action Plan. He's currently being funded out of other funds. And so some of this money presumably would go to pay actually his time for that. And so it's potential that the amount of money not funded may reduce his amount of time spent on these projects. That is possible.
And I think that's what she was getting to with her question.
So he would not be laid off.
No. Okay. All right.
Chris.
Round through Chris. Or actually, I'm going to go to Betty first because...
Okay.
I'm sorry. Have you gone in round one yet?
No, that's okay. Betty can go first.
Okay.
Oh. Thank you. I just have a question, a double question. Why did you combine diversity with climate change?
Exactly.
And which part of this money is for which?
No particular reason why we combine them.
I guess, I mean, I would say we combined them because the diversity and equity and sustainability, all of those programs work out of the city manager's office in the same work unit. So, and both of those areas have had significant planning done in the last year. And so the intent of it is really not to have another plan that we get and put on a shelf, that there's really tangible items in both of those that can move us forward on a couple of these initiatives that we don't have funding to do, but we could do with one-time money and kind of start moving things, chipping away at the things that you all said, great plan, let's go do it. So
you don't know which part of, it's 100,000 for each, or it says 200,000 for combined?
we didn't break it up that way. It was just, I mean, we could give you more detail, but the idea is to try to figure out as quickly as possible which of those we could chomp off and move forward. I think we look at it as all being very tied together in the team.
I don't see it that way, but thank you.
Okay. Chris, Alan, and then Mary Ann.
I appreciate the proposal that Claire's brought up. I mean, I think we did it last year, and it was very, very important and well received. To be able to do it again this year with the funding that's already been set aside for human services does represent a bit of an increase. It's more money than we've done before. We've basically secured what we funded last year through this year. Maybe has been shifted a little bit, but the amount is the same. And for me, that was probably, I was okay with that going into the budget. I do appreciate this because there is still a crying need. But for me, the compelling thing I really want to do is to stabilize funding starting in fiscal year 12. Because as some of us have pointed out, this ongoing one-time money is really not a viable solution. And so for me, it's very important if this passes, it'll be okay. If it doesn't pass, it won't be the focus for me. The focus for me is to use this year to work on stabilizing funding at an appropriate level for fiscal year 12 on. That's going to be the big goal for me. So I appreciate this, but this is not a core one for me. The core one for me, I'm thinking of a year from now. The funding level that's being proposed in the budget for this year doesn't represent a reduction at all. This would be added on money. And that would be okay, but I really have to be focused on stabilizing funding, not finding new sources every year and going through this exercise. So I appreciate it, but that's not going to be my focus for now. My focus will be get the money stabilized, turn it from one-time money into ongoing money so it's there, it's stable, and we know it's available.
Alan.
So I'll preface my comments that I was on the Human Services Commission for 8 years. I chaired it for a number of years and helped start the Safe and Sound project. So I've been working on this issue for a long, long time too, and I understand the need there is very great. And no matter how much money we throw at it, we're not going to meet that need for our community, which is really a sad state of affairs. And for years tried to stabilize that funding for that organization. It has been fairly stable for a while. I don't have a problem with Claire's motion, but I do have a problem with Andrea's in that the two projects, and I'm more familiar with the Climate Action and Energy Plan than the Diversity and Equity Strategic Plan, but these are plans that we've been working on for more than a year in some cases. On the Climate Plan, we had hundreds of people show up at these workshops and contribute hours and hours and hours of time to this, and we're putting together this plan. And so what I fear will happen if you vote for this motion is that we'll have this plan that a bunch of people put a lot of time and effort into, and the staff has put a lot of time and effort into, and the council has as to some degree as well, and it'll be a plan with no implementation. So it'll be another plan we stick on the shelves, which is not what I signed up for. So I can't support that. And I hate these kind of conversations where we end up robbing Peter to play Paul for these I know that's where we get down to this final 0.005% of the budget, $200,000 on $385 million. So I have a hard time supporting that, and I'm not exactly sure. And maybe you can get a little bit more clarity for me about what happens with the diversity
and equity strategic plan, what the pieces, parts of that are scheduled for implementation this next year? And anyway, somebody knows that now.
First round, we still have...
I think I was going to answer the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, what I have are pages of implementation actions, and so it'd be difficult to give you a comprehensive answer on that. But there are probably a dozen actions that will be implemented as of the end of this fiscal year, and we have a community meeting set for June 1. And then we have a number of actions in future years. And so in terms of this one-time funding, what it could go to, as we are integrating actions into department work plans, what the one-time funding can help with are those resource items that are need that one-time funding. So, for instance, again, language and interpretation resources, audit of certain policies to make sure that we're serving all populations appropriately. I mean, there are a number of actions. And then another place where we're looking to bring both the climate and energy action plan together with the diversity and equity strategic plan, there are some actions that have some commonality. And so one of the things that we're looking at is piloting some equity mapping where we can identify some key neighborhoods and look at both equity issues and climate and energy issues and where they come together. So as a, for instance, access to parks, access to food, healthy food, access to transit. So those bring it together and then involve community members in that planning process. And so there are a number of actions, and we can provide an up-to-date report to the Budget Committee if that would be helpful in terms of where we are with the diversity and equity strategic plan.
Joe.
So not to be tough, usually the staff is incredibly brilliant in articulating how they spend the money and where it goes. This is the first time in my brief tenure that I don't feel a whole lot of love, and this strategic climate thing sounds incredibly ambiguous. I mean, I just don't feel it.
Well, maybe we can provide those plans for the Budget Committee.
Hold on. I want to discount the needs. I guess the question becomes, again, guys, when purpose is clear, decisions are easy, and every priorities have seasons and cycles that they go through, right? And even though Claire's is a little more palatable, I like Andrea's idea. Because the real life answer is, I'm not disagreeing, Alan, there may be a time and a place for the funding for the strategic diversity and the climate change. It sounds like what I'm hearing now is there's real needs for LCAS, there's real needs for the Human Services Commission, and maybe this particular season we take part. In fact, I'm almost hearing perhaps all of it. In fact, I don't even make a motion. I'm not hearing just a whole lot of tangibility associated around that fund. Maybe we take that particular season, because we'd be trading one-time funds for one-time funds, correct? Am I just make sure I'm clear? That $200,000, that's a one-time...
Correct.
So kind of a net zero-sum gain kind of thing. So I like Andrew's motion a lot. In fact, I could almost suggest that we just decide how do we divvy up for this season that particular line item to LCAS and the Human Services Commission.
Mine was only human services.
Round still.
No, he did a round one.
He did?
Yep. Andrew.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
So, John, if we were to send you to the drawing board and say, can you find $100,000 within our budget for the Human Services Commission, could you do that within your work? And so we wouldn't have to continue this conversation that's so painful, according to my friend Alan down the road there.
Could you ask the question one more time?
Could you find $100,000 for human services? I mean, I would take it. I would, meet it halfway. 150 is nice, but if we said if it was $100,000, could you find it for us for the Human Services Commission?
One time?
Yes. Or no, actually, thank you for reminding me to incorporate that into the money that we give them.
I can bring back options, absolutely. What it will mean is something else doesn't happen.
Okay. So
and I don't know what that is right now.
So. Just listening to what, I'm sorry if I bring up a subject that people are feeling uncomfortable about, but, when I hear I have not seen the plan that Kelly is referring to, and a lot of the stuff that just a couple of the things outside of the translation piece that I think we're sadly lacking, so I'm really glad to hear that part is going on. A lot of that work is already being done out there in the community, and I just don't know why we haven't connected with the other agencies in the community that are doing that work. And this isn't counseling the work they're doing, and it's to say that all of this stuff is really, really important. I support everything with the diversity and equity strategic plans. Bringing the climate change action plan sounded amazing. There were so many people that came, and it was just so breathtaking to see how many different people came to the table. So that's why I had asked you if you could find this. I mean, you couldn't take it out of what, I guess, Claire, maybe your motion would be better, but I just want to make sure we have that conversation, because I do think that there needs to be some accountability with work that we ask staff to do, that it actually is transparent and accessible for the whole community to understand.
Claire?
Yeah, so I appreciate the conversation, and I didn't mean to seem like I was pulling a fast one on the one time again and again. I mean, each time we've considered this stabilization funding, we've had a thorough discussion about it, but I love Andrea's suggestion to see if there's $100,000 we could add permanently. But actually, the one-time proposal was partly because I had a little prior knowledge of Councilor Pryor's thought around FY12, really looking to stabilize the funding. So that was also in the back of my mind to say, well, if we could have this one time for FY11 and then work on the longer-term solution going forward, that made sense to me. So that was part of the reason for the one-time framing, which I didn't want to bring up something before you did, so. Alan.
Alan, then Mike.
We've got you, Mary.
I haven't talked.
So can staff provide the budget committee members with versions of those two plans, the climate action plan, diversity plan? Joe, since you haven't seen them, your comment's totally valid. They are incredibly detailed. There's, I think, 38 or 39 different actions on the climate action plan. I don't recall the one on diversity off the top of my head, but they're very specific and with very specific items. So I kind of like where Andrea is going with this. I support more funding for the Human Services Commission, but I don't think it should come out of the Climate Action Plan, and I'm not so sure about the Diversity Plan because I'm not exactly sure all the pieces, parts of that.
Mike.
Yeah, Alan's right. There are a number of pieces to both of these plans that are important. There's one that sticks in my mind, particularly with the Diversity and Equity Action Plan, and it's about geographic diversity and equity on boards and commissions. So my question is that a part of the work that's going to be done with this funding?
Good question.
The one-time funding isn't intended to do outreach for boards and commissions. That's an ongoing item that we're going to be doing. So we will continue to expand recruitment efforts to enlarge the pool of applicants for the boards and commissions that the City Council appoints, absolutely, along a number of factors that will continue. The one-time funding would be directed toward those items that are that need a kick and an uplift for resources, such as language and interpretation resources, and technology to support better access to city services. Those sorts of, implementation actions.
Well, I'd like to see us putting particular effort towards that particular part of that plan, as I've mentioned probably a couple of times before, but in the absence of that, I think so. I would be inclined to support Andrea's idea here, but we'll be interested to see what the manager puts forward. Thank you.
Mary Ann.
I support the reports on the actual implementation of these plans as I heard them on diversity and climate change. They may or may not, climate change affects everything. But I wondered, and I'll wait till after I see this, why climate change at this point affected the city. So I'd like to hear that report on all the people. Got married to a geologist for 40 years. I know something about earth science, but that's a pretty complex thing that the city of Eugene can do for climate change. But Alan says they've testified on it, so I want to see that. And I do think, like other people, that these are plans, and one of the staff said that some of the stuff we're ready to implement. Now, there would be a cost probably to implement these plans some way or another. And I don't know that that cost is in the $200,000 or not. So I'm a little confused by the reference to these two plans as a human service thing. I'm totally supporting the motion to fund more permanently human services, because as the recession goes on and people lose jobs, we're going to need more, not less, from human services across the city. So I'm just ditto that let's see those reports of climate change. And if we do, even if they are important, they may be, the climate change, they may be a little bit global and a little bit beyond our reach at this time of our lean resources. So let's give that some thought for Wednesday.
Thank you. City Manager?
Yeah, thank you, John. Just to step back and put a couple of these things in context, and let's talk a little bit about the Climate and Energy Action Plan. A couple things. One, if we go back to our Eugene counts, remember a big part of this budget was built on the data coming in from Eugene counts and the priorities coming in to us from Eugene counts, one of which talks about Climate and Energy Action Plan, the other, or Climate and Energy. Another piece, the council has made some policy decisions on some programs moving forward to include that we'll become a carbon neutral organization by 2030. That's going to cost us some money to get there that we don't currently have. And so when we talk about this $200,000, can I tell you today exactly what that's going to be spent on? No. Can I tell you that's going to help move us towards the goal that you passed, and I think it was an 8-0 vote? Yes. And so part of this is really trying to implement the plans and the policies that council has already said we're moving towards. So that's part of what will be happening with these kinds of dollars. On the DESP side, the Diversity and Equity Strategic Plan, again, one of the council's goals, I think, for years has been around diversity and equity and access. We have put together and have spent countless staff hours putting together the DESP. It's primarily an internal plan to help us move towards a very diverse, accessible organization and try to set an example in the community. Can I tell you specifically what those dollars are going to be spent on? No. Can I tell you that it will be spent to get us towards that goal? Yes. So that's the purpose of these dollars. And so they're one-time dollars. Will $200,000 get us all the way there? No. Is it a good start? Absolutely, it's a good start. So that's the purpose of those kinds of dollars. I think the Human Services Commission, the $150,000, absolutely needed. We could spend $3 million more in this community on human services and still not get there. Is it important to do? Absolutely. And I'll be happy, we'll come back with suggestions on how to turn $150,000 into ongoing dollars. If that's what you'd like us to come back with recommendations, we will. We'll make them legitimate. Something will probably not happen that's currently happening. And so if we, and I guess part of it then is thinking again in the total context. We will come back with that. The $200,000 for LCAS will also be another $200,000, so that's $350,000. We have Hendricks Park and the pool, so now we're at close to $400,000. What was that?
Yeah.
2, 3, 400,000. And absolutely, we can come back and fill that gap with a whole lot of different options, and we will do that if that's what you'd like us to do. But I'd just like to put it in total context of the budget of what we're trying to accomplish. So anyhow, enough said.
I put myself down, and thank you for that explanation. And part of that is we're asked to say we want these things or we don't want these things, and it's up to us to come up with things. And with our limited knowledge of the budget, which isn't as vast as yours, these are the areas that we're picking from. So if you feel that there's more appropriate areas, bring them on. As far as these action plans, something that I've noticed and I've heard from other citizens is that the city and council take a long time to get things done, and they keep pushing them off, and they keep pushing them off, and things never get done. And what I see this budgetary line item is staff saying, we're going to get some things done. You know, we're working on these action plans, and it's going to take some resources, but gosh darn it, we're going to complete some things this year, and these are priorities that were put forward by council. You said they were an 8-0 vote, and they need resources. So, we're looking at the budget and we're saying, well, gosh, here's $100,000. Well, that may not be what is best for the city as a whole. And if we want to make trade-offs, the manager can come up with other areas that we can trade off, and we'll have the same conversation, because he may say, we want to cut the scuba apparatus for the fire department, which is $1 million, and then you've got people saying, well, we can't send our firemen in without correct breathing apparatus, or we may say that we want to deduct 2 patrol officers, and somebody will say that. So those are the decisions we're making, but I'd like us to see something get done. Terry.
Claire, I wasn't real clear on where you were going with the providing additional support to social service agencies. Was that for social service agencies in Lane County, or service agencies in Eugene, or was it for what?
It would go to the Human Services Commission, and they would then allocate it to the agencies, which may or may not be agencies within the city.
So it's really just to help the umbrella.
Exactly. But just to be clear, it wouldn't be going to fund the commission itself. It would be to be distributed to the social service agencies.
In Eugene.
Well, I couldn't remember if last time it was designated
It was
Eugene.
too.
Okay. I take it back. It can be designated for agencies within Eugene, but I didn't make that part of my motion, so at this point, it's open. It could be an amendment.
That would be an amendment that I would make.
I thought it was assumed.
Never assume.
Any other discussion?
You know what they say about that.
John.
Regarding having city manager's office and city staff identify additional services that could be brought forward to discuss for cuts, I guess I'd like to say it'd be good to see maybe at least 5 different areas at no more than 100,000 per each. Like, I guess I don't want to see, here's 450 from this service. I want to see like maybe 100,000 from here, 50,000 from here. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Other questions, comments?
John?
Yes.
So can we suggest a motion that we would intend right now?
Yeah. Yes.
So I would intend to direct the city manager to suggest options for $388,000 worth of ongoing funds to fund $200,000 for LCAS, $150,000 for HSC, $30,000 for Hendricks Park, and $8,000 for the Amazon pool.
And 27 for Creekside Park maintenance.
He just basically did all the
He
cuts.
just added up all the things we've been talking about.
So that's your catch-all.
But you're
Andrea's motion.
No, yeah.
Column A and one from column B.
Catches them all.
And then you can bring that back. Let's see what it'll look like.
You're going to bring it back tomorrow.
So much for Wednesday meeting ending on time.
So are you,
Yes, Andrea, go ahead.
so are you asking him in one general motion to look for money for all those?
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't particularly want him to, I think we would do due diligence for $100,000 for HSC, and I personally am challenged to support giving money to Alcara this time around personally, so I wouldn't support a broad motion of them all, but I would if we did it in sections.
It was, I'll friendly amendment to 100,000, so it's 338, but it's a motion for them to bring back suggestions.
Okay.
So it's not a motion to implement it.
Jennifer.
Because he said he could do it.
You said.
Absolutely, we have $121 million in funds, so
Three things
it
like
would
this.
come out of the $121 million.
Well, in a sense, I feel like it's kind of disingenuous. I mean, John did present us a budget, and I feel like that's just punting back to him. And it's our job, if we don't like what he presented, then I thought we had all agreed that it's up to us to find the sources. So I don't think that's very fair to send that back to him. So I wouldn't support that motion.
And George wants to say
George.
something.
And I can't support that motion either, because then we're right at the start of the very beginning of the budget process again. Because who's to say we're not going to like the cuts that he makes to make up different serves? So we'll be here forever. We'll never get a budget at this rate if we keep going on that principle.
Betty?
I wouldn't support it either, and I certainly wouldn't lump everything together.
Chris?
I like the idea. The only reason that I might not support it wouldn't be because I don't think it's a good idea, but because, as I said before, I like to have enough time to really process what an ongoing impact might look like. To say, go off and take 2 days to come back with some ongoing ads in the tune of $350,000. I mean, you can do magic, but I don't know if you can do that much magic that fast. So I like Alan's idea. I think it's a good one, but I'd like to take a year to really work how we might integrate those into our budget. So I don't want to lose the idea. And if it doesn't go for right now, I don't want to lose the idea. Let's see if we can't begin to look at some options for the next year budget.
Mike?
Yeah, I actually, for reasons stated, wouldn't support this particular motion either, but I don't know that it's necessary, because as I'm looking at this memo that you've provided us, I think you can give us the information without the motion in order to give us particular ideas or thoughts. I'm not sure that it needs to be as broad as the motion suggests, but perhaps maybe an idea or two in line with what Andrea asked. I note here, for example, that you guys went and got the information that I asked about my motion that I'll put into writing. You were able to go back and get the specific numbers here, but they're not in line for me to submit the particular numbers to my motion yet. I want to have a little further conversation before Wednesday. So I think that's kind of the process we should be going through, is asking you for further clarification and information, and then that can help us clarify our more specific motions. So if there's I guess I'd leave it there, that if there's more information you could get Andrea, that would probably be the better way to go than this particular motion.
So, Alan, a clarifying question. This is a motion you intend on making. And I'm just asking that because I'm thinking of the process going forward as far as where we put motions in. If this is one that you're going to put forward, I'm going to put it at the front of the docket after public hearings, so that it gives them as much time. It doesn't do us any good to do it Wednesday at 8:30.
Well, page A5 will be the starting list,
So, okay, so...
Right, nobody's going to like the answer to the question. That's pretty clear. It doesn't need to be a motion if the city manager could put it in the form of a memo that said, if we were going to do this, this is how we would do it.
That works.
What did you say, A5?
A5.
It's
The next level cuts.
It's the stuff they didn't cut.
Yeah.
The next level, which nobody likes.
We have a price tag, I think, for all of those.
A lot of money.
So that would be helpful information, the price tag, because I don't know if we saw that.
Yeah, we'd be happy to provide the price tag on all those
Yeah, that would be
items, or all those that we have ready access to. But
That would be...
Somewhere between...
So that would probably
Oh, it would come out of that.
work for you, Alan? Mm-hmm. Okay. Other things before we take our break? Anything else that...
Yeah,
Mary Ann,
as
sorry.
usual, about the comment that was made that we should all have to find all of the funding for this changes in another budget. For those of us who are citizens and have not worked with this for many years or are new, this is a pretty hard task. Some of us have budget buddies and we can ask them, but it seems like we're asked at the last minute to find things that take hours, and I spent most of the day today and other days trying to read and catch up on where the money was spent, and even with the more efficient budget, it's hard to read. So I would appreciate it with any kind of motion especially Alan's, that the staff point out possible, not probable, but possible places where money could be moved. And budget is about moving money around. A lot of it is. So, be challenged to find this. We're talking about always being challenged. I'm challenged to find those places where I think money could be received and not harm, not harm some other program terribly. And I'm trying to support programs that I think would be harmed terribly by the cuts. So that's the answer, and it's always hard to find. That's the question. That's hard to find the answer. So I would any help staff can give me in finding any possible. Maybe there are none, but I think there might be, and some have been brought up.
All right. Anybody else care to speak? Any input on the next step of the process as far as as far as I understand, it's the will of the chair as to the order of the motions, but I'm willing to, I'm kind of going to look at them and place them how I feel that would be appropriate. I was joking with George earlier. We could put his at the very end, and it would be a very moot point. But I felt that would be not going against the will of the body.
So, John, if there's possible amendments that one may have, is this the session to do it, or do it in an email format and have it ready for Wednesday, or?
Probably what I would do is, if you're thinking of amending somebody's existing motion, would be talk to the maker of the motion, and see where they're at. They may want to amend it before you even do it. But I don't know. Good question. Anybody else have any insight on that? Just make sure you get mine.
John, that would be a good idea, is have them talk to the maker of the original
Sure.
motion. They might even be able to do it by means of a friendly amendment.
Or even incorporate it in the original motion, because these are just intended. There can be changes to
It'll
them.
save time at the next meeting if you do that.
Huh?
And
Yes.
then put it out in email so we can all see it ahead of time.
particular ones that are coming forward, Hendricks and Creekside.
I just wanted to ask the feasibility of putting a motion for the way, some criteria of how the next budget could be presented. Because for looking at this budget, I can see that we are doing a more consumption-based budgeting. And after looking at some of the data, looking at some benchmarks, and now you're looking at the counts, Eugene counts, all of these could then be integrated at a later stage. Sort of, I looked at the benchmarks that is available from ICMA. They're not perfect is a bad answer to a worse answer. But nevertheless, it allows citizens like myself to see where Eugene stacks up against other cities in Oregon. And what's the national average? For example, how many parks, how much acreage of parks do we have? How much of it is paved, developed? Roads, how much are we spending on? So that could, and I have done some limited exercise. It doesn't take long. It took me 3 or 4 hours to extract this data and just put it in a context. I know Eugene is unique, every town has but to have that benchmark, then we can decide, do we want to stress more here or do we want to stress more here, because we have some baseline. And then you have an outcome output that comes from the residents based on their goals. And the benchmarks allows the residents to also interpret, okay, I want to have the whole city parks, or can I have a super? Yeah. Or I want a police state. I'm just saying. It depends what. But to get the citizen follow their goal and where they are, and then based on that decide. So I just wanted to say that the trend has, I mean, I know that city staff are in midst of this budget, but for the next budget.
So I guess city manager and staff, I think what he's saying is, would it be appropriate to put a motion forward that in preparing the FY12 budget, perhaps some of these benchmarks and stuff like that be incorporated?
I guess what I would suggest is, later on this summer, early fall, we'll have some conversation with the Budget Committee around service profile. Some of that will be a part of that. Eugene counts, that's all outcome-based, and as that sort of moves up, I think you'll find that to be very helpful. And also the community. While we've used a lot of the data in preparing this budget, it really hasn't rolled out to the entire community yet, so I think that will also be helpful. So I guess what I would suggest is sort of putting that in abeyance until we've gone through the discussion of service profiles and Eugene counts as we move through the summer and into the fall, and then maybe it would make it easier to think about how we go about doing that. And then I think you're providing guidance really to the Budget Committee on how the Budget Committee would evaluate things into the future.
So it's up to the cities whether we want it, we don't want it. I just wanted to pass it on.
Yeah, thank you. Chris?
Thanks. I like the idea. I think as informed as the Budget Committee can be, particularly around benchmarks, I think that's a great idea, and we can absolutely figure out, I think, a way to do that. We may need to meet a little bit earlier as we start, and it's more around informing and then moving into goals and then building into budget, but I don't think that's going to hurt anything at all, because the point I raised my hand around, which relates to that, is this has been an incredibly fruitful discussion. These have been the examples that stimulated the good conversation. I think this has been one of the most appropriate conversations we've had at the Budget Committee level for years, because the whole ongoing versus one time, where do you get it from and how does it roll in, is a very appropriate discussion we have kind of not dealt with. This is the first time we're really dealing with it in a structural way, because we have to deal with it. Nothing like adversity to make you have to deal with an issue. And we're so far down the budget road that it's very hard to begin to incorporate these in when we're like one meeting away from being done. That's what's giving people kind of that anxiety. But it doesn't mean we can't think about this for next year. Whatever we don't get done this year, we know what we need to do, and so I would advocate that whatever we don't get done, we figure out how to build it into the next budget cycle, because this is important, and I know you want to do more of this, and we want to do more of this, so I think we can.
Doug?
And more of a process question. The intended motions will roll over tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but Wednesday, into motions as written, as the maker of the motion. If I want to,
you can amend it.
Yeah, but if I just want to keep it what has been put forward, is the whole part of the motion going to be before the body?
You mean the intent that you read?
The intended motion that I wrote up.
We'll make sure that staff gets that in the packet. I know it came out electronically. Were those in the packet? Okay.
Not as carryovers.
And I hear you. In fact, with my motion, with just $8,000, it's just such a minuscule amount. George agreed to bring his hat and pass it that way. And as soon as I got so I'll pass my cup over this way. I'll knock at least half that off.
At $500 a piece, we'll get there.
All right. Mike, and then Andrea, and then we're on break.
I'm interested in, suggestion here. I know that puts a whole new level of added work to the presentations that staff often makes during budget cycles, but I thought Chief Kearns did a really good job with his presentation of showing the benchmarks of other cities in terms of officers per thousand and crimes per thousand, and how we're handling and what we're actually outputting with the work, and then looking at that and saying, okay, where does Eugene stack up to that? I think that sort of analysis is particularly helpful. It highlights the glaring need that we have in his department for me. So I would be very interested to see how we stack up in other areas in similar comparisons.
Andrew?
So I noticed, and I don't know if you spoke to this early on, John, when I wasn't here at the budget meeting, or when I had to leave early. Are you looking at all at any days off for staff. I know that we got, so have you spoken to the union and asked them for their help in that?
The budget does not propose any COLA decreases or furlough days.
Furlough days.
Right.
So, so you didn't suggest that to them?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, well, just one more little thing that I'll say is, to the newer members on the board, the service profiles got pushed back this year, and I think those would have been, there are a lot of what Raman was talking about. You'll learn a lot of that in those service profiles, and I think it was a shame that they got pushed back because it put some of our members at a significant deficit when it came to understanding the document, understanding city departments and stuff like that. So those will be happening this summer, and they are a very important part of, at least they were for me, the learning process of how the city works. And so I think you'll see some of that stuff then.
Also, you can get online and read all the service profiles, maybe not up to date, but you can read last year's and the year before if you're at all interested.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll take a break. We will reconvene at 7:30 sharp in the council chambers.
John, are we going to reconvene back here after?
No, we'll just do it over there.
So we will continue discussion.
We're going to have motions hit the table or discussion. If more discussion's needed, but then I'm going to try and get some motions done tonight. I'm going to try and get George's motion done tonight.